Mike McCool here in the Royal Examiner Studio, and with me today is our Commonwealth Attorney John Bell. There's been 600 new laws go into effect on July 1st, and John's going to tell us all about every one of them. I don't think so. But we have narrowed it down to a few that are probably the average person will see. So what's on number one on your list?
Well, we're going to talk about some of the ones the average person is concerned about or will see, and some that are changes behind the scenes, which may affect the average person down the road, but they may not know about it or hear about it for a while to come.
Until they say, press hard, 5 copies.
Yes. Well, what everybody is obviously concerned about is marijuana.
Right.
If you would like to know all about the new marijuana laws, I would suggest that you go to the Royal Examiner website and look at the video that Chief McGalis and myself did with Mr. McCool a while ago.
Yeah,
that was a pretty thorough discussion.
I think so, and we covered all the links, and people can find out about it. So.
All right. So one of the other issues that people like to talk about is guns, and there have been some changes to the gun laws. One of the most important is a restriction on the purchase of handguns. You can only get one every 30 days. Now, a lot of people are under the misapprehension that that means one a month. So if you buy one at the end of June, you're good July 1, the clock is ticked over. No, it is 30 days.
Okay.
So that's on the books. We used to have that on as law in Virginia. It got repealed, and now it's back again for all the good it did before. Not that I know that it did any good, but we have it again. Also, too, Virginia has passed a statute that parallels one of the federal rules. If you're convicted of a crime of domestic violence in Virginia, you lose your gun rights under state law for 3 years. Now, you've already lost your federal gun laws. And if you fill out that firearms purchase application form, they'll have a block that will ask you that anyhow. So I'm not sure why we need it in Virginia, but it does make it a separate crime for somebody to possess a gun after being convicted of an act of domestic violence. It's a brand new misdemeanor. Now, it not taking effect in July, it actually took effect a while back. We now have gun-free zones in Virginia. The General Assembly gave localities the authority to prohibit the carrying of firearms within certain public properties. Like, for example, there are many areas of Fairfax County where you are perfectly legal with your concealed handgun on one area. You take a step to the left, you're committing a crime. So you need to be aware of these things. As a matter of fact, there is now a prohibition against having a firearm within 40 feet of a polling place, even if you have a concealed carry permit. You cannot take your gun in with you to the polling place. You cannot even stand in line with it. You cannot walk by with it. You cannot man a booth within the prescribed limit to hand out literature if you've got your gun on you. That's now part of Virginia law. All right. Now, one of the more important things is background checks for all sales. Now, a lot of people are under the impression that the background checks for gun purchases are a new thing. Well, they're not. For the last quarter century, if you wanted to buy a gun from a gun dealer, you've got to go fill out multi-page forms with lots and lots of intrusive personal questions. You fill out a separate Virginia form, and then all of these forms get submitted for a computerized background check. And if your name and birth date are close to somebody who's been a bad actor, then everything gets put on hold while somebody with the state police manually rechecks everything to make sure that you are not the bad guy attempting to buy a gun. Now, a lot of people who bought their first gun were very surprised to hear that it wasn't as easy as they'd been told.
Or sometimes it takes, I noticed my wife purchased one and it took like 5 minutes and they approved it. I got mine, it took an hour. But, and he said because I have a top secret security clearance, they take longer to get mine. That's their story, and that's what they were going to stick to.
I've come to the conclusion that there must be a very evil John Bell who was born sometime in the mid-50s, because I have been delayed for up to 4 hours.
Right.
Yeah.
So it happens.
I can show them my badge, and it doesn't make any difference.
They don't care.
Now, what is new is that the background check requirement had never applied to private sales. Yeah, if you say, John, I like that gun, and I said, look, yeah, I haven't taken it out of the cabinet in years.
Right.
If you want it, make me an offer, and I could sell you my gun as long as I knew that you were not a convicted felon or a person otherwise not legally able to possess a gun. Now you have to get a background check by the purchaser before you can sell the gun. What that means is that you're going to have to go to your licensed firearm dealer, pay them whatever fee that they ask for, fill out the forms, and they will run the background check. And once that's done, I can sell you the gun. Now that only applies to sales. Say if I wanted to loan a gun to my neighbor because his house got broken into, that's fine. If I want to give a gun to one of my sons, that's fine. But sale is very expansive. I cannot sell you a gun in exchange for your old bass boat. I cannot swap you a pound of weed for a pistol.
Right.
It's got to be an actual gift to avoid coming under that requirement. So if you've got a gun you're trying to get rid of and you're not going to sell it to a gun store, you're going to sell it privately, that person who's purchasing it, the two of you need to go and get that background check done. All right. One of the other areas that, and again, this is nothing that people get pulled over for, but there's been a sea change in the way we do searches and seizures. Now, one of the main changes is to the search warrant requirement. Now, previously in Virginia, a judge could authorize officers to execute a no-knock warrant. That means that they can make entry without knocking and saying, police here, please come answer the door. And they had no-knock warrants because there were situations where they believed the person inside was dangerous, was armed, might destroy evidence. That knock and alert would give them time to get the shotgun out of the closet or to
Flush it down the toilet, right?
Absolutely. No-knock warrants are now banned in Virginia. No exceptions. And any evidence that's seized from going in with a no-knock entry cannot be used in any court of law in Virginia. Now, what they have also done is restricted nighttime service of warrants. Now, the original legislation was just insane. And even Governor Northam believed it had gone too far. When you're too far for Governor Northam, you've gone too far. You've gone too far. So he put a suggested change, and now the law says that if you want to execute a search warrant after 5 p.m. but before 8 a.m., you've got to get a judge to sign off on it and have to show cause why it needs to be served at night. Or why it needs to be served without waiting towards the following morning. Now, under some circumstances, you can get away without the judge's signature. You can't find a judge, then the magistrate can issue it on your affidavit, your under oath statement that you made a good faith effort. Well, nobody knows what a good faith effort is. How many judges' wives or husbands do you have to get angry at them for calling at 3 a.m. Before you've made a good faith effort? The law doesn't tell us that. One of the other changes is, and this one has been in effect since March, has to do with traffic stops. There's a whole range of traffic stops that generally come under the heading of pretext stops. And those are ones that folks have accused law enforcement of using as an excuse to stop vehicles, to search them, or to investigate other crimes. The dead tail light, the expired inspection sticker, the dangling object from the windshield, the window tint, a variety of things. Now, all of these, they didn't repeal those laws. Those are still violations. But an officer cannot search a vehicle. Let's put it this way. If an officer stops the vehicle for having 2 dead tail lights, that's a good stop. And if he finds reason to search the vehicle, everything from it is a good search. If he stops it for 1 dead tail light, that's not a good stop, and nothing that's found in a search of the vehicle can be used. The goal is to try and rein in law enforcement from abusing discretion to get to over-enforce the law against minority communities. However, nobody in the General Assembly has ever heard of the law of unintended consequences. Now, say you're John Smith, deputy sheriff, yeah, and you're driving down the road, and you see your neighbor's car with a burnt-out taillight, and you hit the blue light just to pull over to let your neighbor know, hey, you've got a burnt-out taillight, Fred. You should, I know a guy who can help you with that. Well, if you walk up to the car to say hi to Fred, and it's not Fred driving the car, and you hear Fred's daughter screaming from the back trunk, none of that evidence is now admissible in a court of law in Virginia. Yeah, it's just a flat prohibition on using it. And
Interesting.
yes,
But there's always the consequence. There's always the what if situations that always come up. But hopefully those will be rare.
we can hope.
We can hope.
Yeah.
We can hope. But
We can
again,
hope.
that's this year. That doesn't mean you have one or two public events like that happen, then they'll change the law to something else.
We'll see. Yeah, the original version of the law prohibited stopping for any lights out. Well, for example, if you had no headlights functioning, you could not stop that car.
That's extreme.
Yeah, and that one got changed. That's another one that was too extreme for our governor.
Right. Well, I think you go back to the trunk situation. The stop then on the form is, I seen the trunk beating up and down, and I could hear it banging as I'm driving down the road.
Different situation. Yeah. And in line with what we talked about marijuana earlier, you cannot search a vehicle based simply on the smell of marijuana.
Right. And dogs now don't hit on marijuana any longer.
Yes,
right?
they had to retrain, well, not retrain, they had to basically turn all of the old drug dogs into household pets and bring in new dogs. All right. Now, overdoses. Yeah. Previously, when somebody would overdose and the police showed up at the scene, if there was evidence of possession, they could be charged with possession. They could be brought to court on this, and usually if they didn't have a prior drug offense, they would be put on a first offender program where they could go to counseling, they could perform some community service, they could pass their drug test, and at the end of that, the case would be dismissed. And that's how a lot of overdoses were handled. Well, the law has been changed, so if somebody calls or notifies the authorities about an overdose, nobody at that scene can be prosecuted for possession of drugs. And it doesn't matter how many times it happens. Somebody overdoses on a Monday, they show up, they find fentanyl, they find methamphetamine, they find needles. All they can do is Narcan the guy, take him off to the hospital, try and get him to make a statement, and then let him go. You cannot prosecute that person. If he does it again on Wednesday, same thing. Can't prosecute him. Does it again on Saturday, same thing. Can't prosecute him. So that's one of these other laws. It starts out with good intent because you want people to call for help.
Right.
If your buddy is overdosing, we want you to call 911. We don't want you to hesitate because you're afraid of what might happen to you. But at the same time, it used to be a defense that you could present to a prosecution. Say, Judge, I realize this happened, but I did the right thing. And the judge could say, okay, I'm going to acknowledge that you did the right thing, and I'm going to cut you loose. Now it's just an exemption from prosecution. It is the closest thing in Virginia we have to a simple get-out-of-jail-free card. So now when somebody does a drug overdose, the police take a report, file it away, and that's it.
Write that address down on their card. They will. I'm sure they'll keep an eye on it. But you're right. Now they got to find some other way to.
Right. All right. Now, if somebody does get arrested for a crime, there's been a drastic change in the way we evaluate bail in Virginia. Until today, there were a number of offenses in Virginia which carried presumptions. It was presumed that you should be held until trial. The two things you look at in a bail hearing is, number one, will the person appear? And number two, is there and the community safety assured by putting these people back out on the street? So if you committed a whole certain group of violent crimes or crimes against children, or if you committed a felony offense while out on bond for a felony offense, it was assumed that you would stay in jail. Now, you can rebut that presumption. What that means is that you can present evidence to the judge that you have a plan in place, you have a system in place, whereby you could be pretty well assured that you will show up to court and that you are not going to endanger yourself or others while this happens. Well, that whole system has been abolished. There are no presumptions against bail anymore in Virginia.
Interesting.
And I will tell you that there were a lot of people who were rightly held a couple of weeks ago who judges will probably be turning loose next week because there are no presumptions.
Interesting.
Yeah. All right. Trials. Major sea change in how we do trials in Virginia. Since Thomas Jefferson and Patrick Henry argued cases as young lawyers in Virginia, Virginia juries have decided sentences.
Right.
And Virginia is rare among states these days for holding to that. For giving normal citizens in the community a voice, not just in guilt or innocence, but in fixing the punishment. As of July 1, jury sentencing is gone in Virginia unless the defendant requested 30 days prior to trial.
That's a big change.
That's a major change. That is a major change. Yeah, we expect to see a lot more jury trials. Because the defendant can have his argument in front of a jury, but he doesn't have the worry that if the jury rejects the argument, he will feel
hold that against him.
he will feel the full weight of the community.
Right.
Instead, the cases will go to be sentenced by judges who will be sentencing according to a set of sentencing guidelines. Now, Virginia has sentencing guidelines. They're not mandatory like the federal,
Right.
or other states where you put in the numbers and what comes out as your sentence, and that's by law. The sentencing guidelines give Virginia judges recommendations, and what they do is they've got an office in Richmond that has got the results of every felony sentencing for probably close to a half century now. And they crunch those numbers and they say, what this crime with this kind of prior criminal history is worth around the state. And it's based on what other judges have done in sentencings. And it will, on a major felony, it will give you a low end, a high end, and a midpoint. The low end says almost nobody in Virginia is pulling less time than this. This is kind of the bottom end. The high end is almost nobody's pulling more time, actual time, than this. Midpoint is not halfway between. The midpoint is most people are pulling this sentence.
Right. That way, if you go on this low end, the public's not going to crucify you for giving them too light of a sentence.
But these are voluntary guidelines. The
Right.
judges have the authority to sentence anywhere within the legal range of punishment. However, our judges are reappointed every 6 years,
Right.
and one of the things they look at in the reappointment is how are you following the guidelines?
Exactly.
So the sentencing guidelines are kind of a known quantity. And if you wanted that sentencing guideline range, and there are some instances where judges would go higher or lower. But if you wanted to know basically the range, you would go to a judge trial and go under the guidelines. If you took a jury trial, you may have a chance of convincing a jury of something that a judge is not going to buy. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, the jury might decide that they need to send a louder message about this crime, and you might be running the risk of a much higher sentence than the judge would give. So that's gone. No jury sentencing. So everybody can make their best pitch to the jury and then still go back and get the benefit of that sentence by the judge with those historic guidelines.
Well, that might move the trial along a little faster as well. They don't have to have another case for sentencing. Normally, don't they just have almost another trial for sentencing? Or
there is a separate hearing for sentencing that's held right after the guilty or not guilty verdict, and that'll speed that up. But I'm a great believer in having the people of the community speak.
I think so. I think you're going to see when the first trial comes out like that, the jury going, "What? When did that change?" They're going to look at it and say, "Whoa!" Then you'll start hearing it over the next 6 months. We'll see what the community comes out and thinks about that, and they'll tell their delegate, and the delegate will change the law next year.
So we'll see.
I tell you, there's one thing that it's funny. You have some of these laws where they just thrown everything out, and one of my pet peeves is littering. Well, I've seen where the litter fines have doubled. Mm-hmm. So here they take a something like littering, which most people don't consider that a very high crime, and yet take the fine from $250 to $500. So that's another, I don't want to call it an extreme, but it's a crime that, like you say, they're going to legalize marijuana, throw out domestic violence, all these other things on the trial, then turn around and double the litter fines. I mean, I don't know. It just seems...
Well, it was ironic, when before the legalization, when marijuana was a $25 civil penalty, you were subject to a higher fine for throwing your joint out the window than you were for smoking it.
Exactly. So maybe that'll be good, because littering is it's a pet peeve of mine, and nothing aggravates me more than pulling up to the traffic light and someone opens the door and dumps their cigarette ashtray out on the road. I thought, I want to just like bump them,
There's this wonderful viral video. It looks like someplace in Asia, where a fellow in this fancy hot rod pulls up, next to a hotel and, throws crap out on the sidewalk. Right. And the fellow at the hotel reaches over there, picks it all up, throws it back in the car. When the guy tries to get out, he slams the door on him and just tells him to leave. And that's been shared hundreds of thousands of times. So there's a lot of people just like you.
Just like me. I know. Yeah.
Now, there's been some changes to the way crime is punished in Virginia. The General Assembly came very close to eliminating all mandatory minimum sentences. There were two separate bills in the House and the Senate that passed, but they weren't able to reconcile before the end of the General Assembly. What they did succeed in doing was repealing the statute that gives increased punishment for stealing. If you steal one time and it's under $1,000, that's a misdemeanor. If you steal a second time, this was yesterday, and it's under $1,000, you had a mandatory minimum sentence. If you stole a third time, it didn't matter how much it was, that would be a felony. 3 strikes and you're up in circuit court dealing with a felony. That entire statute was repealed. So it doesn't matter how many times you steal. As long as you keep it under the grand larceny limit, which is now $1,000, it's always a misdemeanor. You could steal from Costco on Monday. You could steal from Walmart on Tuesday. You could steal from Martin's on Wednesday. You could steal from your front lobby here on Thursday, hit no more stores Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. But what you've got is 7 misdemeanors and no felonies, as long as it stays under that $1,000.
That's a lot different.
That's a lot different.
Yeah. I noticed that, how about reporting crimes? I noticed what they've done previous years when I had an office in Arizona. They have a law, you talk about stealing. If you went to the grocery store and stole a pack of gum, police showed up, took a report, and that was a crime. But if you filled your gas up with a car and drove off with $100 worth of gas, they wouldn't even report it. They wouldn't even come take a report on it. So they did obviously change that later on, but those are the kind of situations where the laws are,
Well, oddly enough, we did change the gas drive-off law in Virginia. Now, previously, in addition to being charged with theft, and you can still be charged with theft, you could have your license suspended. And you may remember the little stickers that they have on the pump with the state. Yeah. They've had to peel all those off because you can no longer have your license suspended for a gas drive-off.
Is that a new law?
Yes.
Another new law?
Another new law. There's also been a change, and this is the classic type of thing that nobody hears about. A number of years ago, Virginia abolished parole. They called it the Truth in Sentencing Law. That when somebody was given a sentence, they served that sentence, or most of it. There still was left some good time in the system, so if you dotted your I's, crossed your T's, and minded your manners while you were serving your sentence, on a felony, you'd serve about 86% of it. A good chunk of it. They gave you 14% off for good behavior. And that's been the case for years. Now they have redone the sentencing system. Now this one takes effect actually next July. But if it's a nonviolent offense, you only serve 65%. And it's graduated up.
But then you're eligible for it, but it's still somebody has to decide, like a parole board?
No.
Or is it just an automatic?
It's an automatic.
It's like a fixed. So we're going to give you 10 years, but you only have to serve 6.5.
That's it. Yeah,
Is that like on probation then? Is that what the deal is? So if you mess up, you're going back for your 10?
no.
Oh, well.
If you get a flat 10, and you serve that 6.5, you're done. Now, if the judge has given you suspended sentence at the time you're sentenced, you've still got that over your head when you come back.
Okay.
But if you get a flat sentence and you serve it, you're done.
So what's the rationale behind giving someone 10 years when they're only going to serve 6.5? Just curious. I mean,
Yeah, that's why we had the truth in sentencing laws to begin with. Yeah, what they're trying to do is lower sentences for nonviolent offenders. There was a big effort to bring back in parole. Yeah, when I first started prosecuting in Warren County, it was in 1988. If you got a 1-year prison sentence, you were paroled after about 3 months. Yeah, and so you were only serving a fraction of the sentence you were given. Yeah, and the truth in sentencing law, the abolition of parole, changed that. So when you got a sentence, that was your sentence. Yeah, and you could shave off the maximum of 14-15% with good behavior while you were incarcerated. Now it's going to change. As a matter of fact, probation estimates that when this kicks in next July, they'll have about an extra 10,000 people released early.
speaking of releasing early, what's the for people that have been convicted of some of these minor marijuana laws, are they going to look back and say, well, now that the law has changed, we're going to change some of their sentences?
There are not that many people who are serving time on minor marijuana offenses these days. There are still, even under the new laws, there's still going to be felony level crimes for the mass production and sale of marijuana. Yeah. So I don't know what it's like in other parts of the country, but there is nobody in Virginia who's serving a 20-year sentence for selling an ounce of marijuana. Yeah.
So that's just, you just hear they're going to let all these people out. They really probably know when they've already done it.
They've pretty well already done it. Now, there are going to be provisions that will kick in. This is down the road. This is one of these pieces of legislation which needs to be reenacted and considered, so it's several years down the road, where there will be an automatic sealing of criminal convictions for certain crimes. Yeah, so those will disappear from the public record. They'll still be there for some purposes, but for the average person, they can say no, and nobody can say, you can check
like
and say
expunging all their...
Yeah, it's not quite an expungement, because a full expungement, literally, we take the file and shred it. It's gone. Yeah, well, under the sealing, the records will still be there, but there's no public access to them. That's in the pipeline a few years down the road. Now, once you get past your sentence and you're back on probation, there's been a drastic change to our probation system. Now, normally, if you violate your conditions of probation and you come back to court, the judge can do anything he wants with you, within the bounds of your original sentence. If you were given, say, a 2-year sentence and the judge suspended all of it on the basis that you be of good behavior, but say you keep getting positive drug tests, the judge can revoke a month, a year, or the full 2 years, whatever the judge feels appropriate in that circumstances. Now, there's some guidelines that the probation department has, which they present to the judge, similar to the sentencing guidelines, but the judge can still do what he's wanted. Well, the General Assembly has taken that discretion away from the judge in some cases for what are called technical violations. And technical doesn't mean you just forgot to check the wrong box. Technical means you haven't reported into your probation officer for a month, a year, 2 years, or you've gotten repeated dirty drug tests, or you have violated your probation officer's instructions about not going here, not going there, or you haven't met your probation officer. You've done virtually anything except commit a new crime. If the probation officer reports you back to court for violating probation for a first violation, the judge cannot give you any jail time. He just puts you back on probation. For a second violation, the judge can give you up to 14 days and then has to put you back on probation. It only is the third violation that the judge has full discretion.
That's a big change.
That's a major change. And it's going to result in some weird things. Like, we have a lot of probationers in Virginia who get transferred to other states. Say you've been living in Virginia, you got in with the wrong crowd, you did something stupid, you've got a suspended sentence, and you decide, I'm going to go back home to Indiana. And I'm going to start over, and I'm going to try and rebuild my life there. Well, suppose you're in Indiana and you flunk a drug test. Well, under the Interstate Compact, where we transfer people back and forth, we agree that we're going to extradite these people if they violate. So if that guy gets a dirty drug test in Indiana, Indiana has to report it to Virginia Probation. Virginia Probation has to issue a violation. I have to approve the extradition. The Sheriff's Department has to go fetch him and bring him back from Indiana, and we bring him before the judge, and the judge has to release him back on probation.
Yeah, see, those are the kind of things you talked about, that circumstances that you don't really think about.
They have never heard of the law of unintended consequences.
Well, those are things, if it happens a lot and people pressure the delegates again and the senators, they'll look at it and say, this has happened 7,200 times this year.
Yeah, well, and
really a lot of this boils down to budget. I mean, the bottom line is they're trying to cut cost. And
well, it's not even cutting cost, because the result of this in some locations means that violations that the probation offices would have handled in-house, they're now going to be bringing back to court to burn those first two violations.
Right.
So we're going to be getting a revolving door in and out, when the intent of these statutes
they have less burden on the court. Now we're giving them more.
Now we're giving it more. Now, if you violate a special condition of probation, like say sex offenders have special conditions, these don't apply. Now we're going to get in some ironic situations. Like, there's a general condition of probation that you don't use alcohol to excess. Now there's some people we have as a special condition of probation that you don't use alcohol at all. So a guy who uses alcohol to excess, because that's his condition, he falls down drunk at his kid's graduation, gets arrested for drunk in public. That's a technical. He's going to be released. The guy who has one sip of beer at a party before going into his probation officer, and he's got the special condition, he gets the full weight of the court on him.
Well, that's people. These are consequences that
Yes.
You do the crime, you're going to have to pay the time.
So we've got odd inconsistencies.
Yeah.
Like, for example, now that marijuana is legal, if you want somebody not to use marijuana on probation, you have to make it a special condition. Well, if he violates a special condition by using marijuana, he gets the full weight of the court on it. But the guy who uses fentanyl, that's a technical violation.
Right.
And he gets let loose.
When you said that marijuana is legal, let's talk about federal real quick. It's not. It's still a federal crime.
Oh, it is still a federal crime. Now, the U.S. Attorney's Office is not going to send the FBI to knock on your car window and ask to check your glove compartment. But it's still. Somebody asked me, hey, John, can people in your office smoke weed now that it's legal? I said, no, it's still a federal offense.
Right.
We're a law enforcement agency. We're going to obey all the laws, even the ones on the federal level.
Yeah, so there's a lot of federal officers in our community and around our area. So, be one of those I'll call it a technicality, but don't walk down the street smoking your joint thinking you're going to get scot-free.
And that's still against the law
That's
in Virginia.
still against the law, right?
That's still against the law in Virginia, and repeated offenses of that have graduated increasing punishments. All right. Well, I have ranted for a while about some of these things. So, Mike, you have a list of
Well, I think you've covered. Here's something I thought was interesting was alcohol to go from restaurants. That now they're able to sell and deliver mixed beverages for off-premise consumption. They did that during COVID when they had the special dispensation from the ABC. That made a big difference for some businesses, and it looks like now they've made that. Is that? Am I reading that right?
You are reading.
I guess it says the law is in effect for 1 year while they're studying it.
Yeah. They're going to see
that.
long term. Now, there's a lot of restaurants that are still recovering, and a lot of people decided that they liked restaurant carryout.
Right.
the nice thing about the restaurant carryout is nobody cares what clothes you're wearing while you're eating it at home.
Exactly.
Yeah, nobody cares. You can pick your own TV station. You can do whatever you want. And a lot of restaurants' profit margin comes from alcohol sales. So if they can sell a cocktail or a cocktail kit, I know some of the restaurants were doing the assemble your own cocktails. Or a bottle of wine with the insane markup.
Yep.
Then that helps them keep afloat. So what we're trying to do, as I'm assuming, is see how this new model of restaurant sales works.
Right. You didn't mention the abolishment of the death penalty. I mean, that
is a big one. Actually, I had a note about that. That is a major thing. And however you feel about it, the fact that it was done based on Zoom conferences rather than full hearings with everybody giving an opportunity to weigh in, bothers me. You can make a case for or against the death penalty. I believe we should have it as a last resort for those absolute incorrigibles. But I will respect people with a different view, but I don't respect the way it was done. Like I said, literally, it was done in the middle of a pandemic over Zoom calls.
Right.
These are matters of life and death should be treated as matters of life and death. I mean, these changes were passed like people deciding on how to do a PowerPoint.
Right.
Yeah.
And we'll see, because that's a topic that the public, like you say, it's not just most people aren't down the middle; they're either left or right, and that we'll see when we have some horrific crime and they don't have the death penalty applied to it. We'll see how the public responds at that time.
Yeah. Ironically, the death penalty cases were the only crimes left that mandated jury sentencing. Yeah, because under the federal requirements, for a constitutional death penalty, have the jury being able to consider that was part of the due process. So they left that in, but of course, once they abolished the death penalty,
right,
that went out as well.
I have another one here. I think these are just things that I think are strange. Strange, but it says ban the police from using facial recognition, so they can't use technology now to.
There is a whole convoluted statute about hoops that have to be jumped.
You watch that on television.
Yeah.
Kaleidoscope gets. I've identified him in 1 second.
It doesn't work that way.
It doesn't.
These TV shows, the CSIs. They have as much relation to real life investigation as porn has to real life sex.
That's a good.
Yeah. I mean, if I want to match somebody's fingerprints, they send the card off and I wait 3 to 6 months.
Right.
Yeah. If I want DNA done, it doesn't get back to me this afternoon.
Well, you can't take it with your phone and get it scanned and that's the guy.
No, I get to call back and forth to the Department of Forensic Science and see where I am in the very long line. To get the DNA analysis done. Yeah.
I can remember we've done some video work for people and they come. Can you zoom in on that and clean that up and do? It's taken on a VHS tape that's 50 years old. And no, there's no magic bullet, to do that. Well, on television, I said, this is real life. Yeah. And I just thought that was interesting about facial recognition. It seems like the technology is always a step above the law. It seems like on computer crimes and different kind of things like that.
Well, what's behind that is some of the earlier versions of facial recognition technology don't work well with some minority groups, smaller sample sizes.
Right.
And so they believe that those are inherently discriminatory. And also, there is a legitimate privacy expectation. Do you want to be tracked every single place you go? Well, normally, all of us are tracking ourselves.
Exactly.
Yeah, but that's my choice to carry that device.
Right.
Yeah.
We always hear about all the cameras they have in London. You can't go anywhere without being on video, so that's part of that. Some places have adapted that. Move on to education. I see where it says they're going to require 5-day in-person learning now. So they had to pass a law to do something that we've always done. I mean,
yes.
I thought that was kind of a strange law to have.
Well, that's the General Assembly basically forcing all of.
I think you're going back to school.
Yeah.
I think that's what it is. No
Yeah.
more.
Yeah. End of story. We're not going to fool around on this.
Right. I think I've gone through the list. You've covered. There's some things about voting and different things about election laws and absentee ballots. So a lot of that stuff. We'll put some links to the state site there that has all these laws, and it's all 600 of them. You can go through and find out some things too. But I think we've covered just about everything. I see one here. How about medical marijuana? I see that there's going to be some changes in that, and some pharmacy laws. I didn't even realize that it was against the law to choose your own pharmacy. I thought anybody could do that, but I guess in the past your insurance company told you who you were going to use.
In network, out of network.
Yeah, I guess that's how they do that. Well, you
Yeah.
can use whatever you want, but you're going to pay twice as much for it.
Yeah. Oddly enough, we have had a legal exemption from medical marijuana in Virginia for decades. It's just that there was nobody in Virginia who was allowed to prescribe it.
Right.
Yeah.
That's like you can grow it, but you can't buy seeds.
No, because there was for a little while a tiny limited federal pilot program. They actually had a government marijuana farm in, I forget whether it was Louisiana or Mississippi.
Right, I remember that.
And there are some people who had conditions like glaucoma that it worked very well for, and they would get their federal marijuana package, and they would have a prescription for that and could use it. And if you were one of those individuals in Virginia and had that prescription with the federally permitted marijuana, you had an exemption under the statute. Our marijuana laws always had an exception for a prescription.
Right.
But of course, there were no doctors in Virginia who would write you a marijuana prescription.
Well, next month, they're going to reconvene in Richmond for a couple weeks, I guess. The governor's called back a session, right? Mm-hmm. Any chance that they're going to extend the governor's emergency powers that he's had? Because they've run out. I understand they run out today. Is that when it was? June 30th? Is that?
Well, he had extended the declarations. Yeah, he can keep extending those almost ad infinitum. We're still working under a judicial emergency, which has been extended this week till July 21st. So speedy trial statute has been told in Virginia since last March.
Right.
Which has created all kinds of other havoc. Yeah. But we'll see. The two things that the governor has announced for that special session is, one is how we're going to spend all the federal COVID money.
Yeah.
And the other is election of judges for the Virginia Court of Appeals. Now, one of the changes that's been made, which again, this is one of these things that affects people down the road and they don't really know is happening. Virginia has three step. You have your trial in the circuit court, and this is for criminal offenses. Then if you want to appeal, you would appeal to the Court of Appeals, and from there to the Virginia Supreme Court. And previously, if you wanted an appeal, you would have to file a petition to the Court of Appeals saying, this is the issue. I think it's a good issue. I think you should let me have an appeal.
Kind of get permission.
Yeah, going to get permission to file a full appeal. And 99 times out of the 100, the Court of Appeals would say, no, we're not interested. And that'd be the end of it. They've changed the law so everybody who's convicted of a crime or has any judgment in a circuit court which they don't like automatically gets a full-blown appeal before the Court of Appeals. Yeah, they have an opportunity to argue all of the issues on the record in front of the judges. Now, you can imagine that means that there's going to be a flood of cases to the Court of Appeals. So what they did was they increased the size of the Court of Appeals by 7 judges. Now, one of the things the governor is going to do in August is appoint all 7 of those judges in the General Assembly before the fall elections. So the judges are going to be appointed by the same people who have abolished the death penalty, legalized marijuana, abolished penalties, subsequent offense penalties for larceny, tried to do away with mandatory minimum offenses, have changed the probation rules, have changed the search and seizure rules. Those people are going to pack the Court of Appeals.
Right. And we know how people went up in arms over packing the Supreme Court. It's kind of the same thing, making it a political venture, so to
So
speak.
the packing of the appellate court in Virginia is a done deal
Yeah, and that's going to affect us because they have a long term.
for years.
Yeah,
Yeah, because a group of judges picked by the current General Assembly, will have the opportunity to review every criminal case in Virginia where the defendant is not satisfied.
And and you're going to, like you say, the ones that can afford it are going to. Or is that changed as well too? You're going to be, if you were a public defender.
If you are an indigent defendant, there is no cost now for transcripts or for filing your appeal.
Or then your public defender will do your appeal.
Your public defender will do your appeal.
I can see where everyone's going to appeal almost everything.
It's zero cost for doing it.
Yeah.
And the thing about losing an appeal is that it doesn't increase your sentence.
There you go.
Yeah,
And you're rolling the dice. The worst case is you're no worse off than where you were.
You literally have nothing to lose.
Yeah.
And you have an excellent chance that your appeal is going to be heard by a panel of the brand new judges who have been picked by people who believe that the only real victims of the criminal justice system are the criminals.
Right. Well, we know how the appeals went. We just heard a case the other day with Bill Cosby. So that was an appeal case.
Yes.
And overturned the thing on whatever reason it was. But that goes to show you that, appeals work.
Some appeals work. Yeah.
Well, and if that was in Virginia, he could have been automatic.
Yeah.
Because I know that appeals, you can only appeal so many times, and there's a lot of rules on appealing.
There's a lot of rules on appeals. But in Virginia, most people have never made that first hurdle.
Yeah.
And now, they've just taken that first hurdle off the field
Wow.
altogether.
Yeah. Wow. A lot of changes. We'll see
lot
how
of
it
changes.
goes.
Yeah.
So we'll come back after our session in August, and we'll see what they really did. I do get a lot of questions about when I ask you about the emergency status. People are, social media talk is about our mask mandate. Can you comment on that? From the law?
Right now, the guidance from the governor is basically to follow the CDC mandates. And the CDC mandates are basically saying if you're not vaccinated, you should mask and maintain social distance, particularly inside. If you are vaccinated, social distance is recommended still, but it's not a requirement.
Yeah, because I just heard on the news this morning, California is still mandating vaccinated people still wearing their mask. So they don't want to give that up. I mean, they're doing it. So, and then again, that's one of those left-right topics. There's no one in the middle.
Well, I'm as close to middle as you get. I took both doses of the vaccine. I was sick as a dog for dose number 2.
Right.
So I would really not like to put a mask back on.
Right.
But I am 65 years old. That means I'm in a vulnerable age group.
Mm-hmm.
I have blood sugar issues, which is another vulnerability. I would like to travel in the future.
Sure.
I've got, at least for the next couple of years, a reliable income, and I've got decent health insurance.
Right.
I'm willing to be a guinea pig.
Sure.
And it makes sense for me.
Right.
Now, if I were 20 years old in the peak of health, looking at some of the side effects that are racking up, maybe an entirely different question.
Right. I think I've told you before, my youngest daughter and her husband and 3 kids just landed in Malaysia last week, and I think yesterday was their last day. They had a 14-day quarantine after they flew there. Then they had a quarantine for 14 days because Malaysia locked it down again. They were open for a while, then locked it back down. And so, and they had to be vaccinated in order to travel. Of course, even vaccinated, they still had a 14-day. They've eliminated a lot of that in this country, but right now the UK, I think it's locked down. You can't travel from the US to the UK, not like you used to anyway. And so there's all these quarantines going on around the world, and we just don't see that in Warren County. We're just used to running to the store and going here. We don't realize that the world is a different place.
And we're seeing a lot of different responses around the world. I just read that Singapore has decided that they're basically going to treat COVID like a flu. It's a chronic illness we have to deal with and be with us, so they're not going to shut things down.
Right.
And I'll be interested to see how that works for them.
Yeah.
I'm one of those people in the middle. I'm not a it's all a hoax. I'm not a it's the plague. It's a new disease which is very dangerous to people in a certain demographic, which I am rapidly approaching.
I
so
thought you were talking about that follicle the policing we have.
Oh, yeah.
Is that a symptom, or only bald people get the COVID?
Oh, yeah.
We'd both have it, wouldn't we?
Oh, yes.
All right. Well, John, it's always fun talking to you.
Yeah.
I know that sometimes people don't really want to. They don't. He's a lawyer. We don't need to hear all that. But it's interesting, these changes and how they'll affect our lives. Really, if not us, our indirectly or directly, and pay attention to things like that. And more changes are coming, and a lot of it is politically motivated in a way. I mean, that as the state legislature changes its makeup, goes from Democrat to Republican, back to Democrat to Republican, and we see our laws changing, reference to either more conservative or more liberal, one way or the other. So we'll curious to see how that goes.
Yeah, previously the General Assembly was influenced by what you could call older Virginia, the
Right.
rural areas, the areas outside of the major cities.
Right.
And now it's Fairfax, Richmond, Newport
Tidewater,
News,
right, exactly.
that are governing for the rest of the state.
Right.
Yeah.
When you look at the maps, there's those 3 little blue dots, and you're thinking like, well, how can that small area have such? But they represent a large number of people.
Well, absolutely. If you're looking at raw population
Yeah,
numbers,
yeah.
Unless everybody in the rural area turns out and has their voices heard,
Exactly.
then those groups will always come up with the majority vote.
Yeah.
A lot of folks out here have been reluctant to get involved in politics because we're pretty happy with the way things are going. Yeah.
But I think we should. All politics are local, so
Yeah.
you need to look at our local area, and that's where we need to concentrate on it. If we can get our local area under control, it'll trickle up. We hope.
Absolutely.
Again, John, really appreciate you
thank
coming in talking to us, and we'll talk to you again after the August session, and we'll see what happened then.
All right.
All right. Thanks
Thanks.
again.